So today I would like to welcome Joanna Kyriazis, Senior Policy Advisor with Clean Energy Canada. They're an NGO working to accelerate the transition to a renewably powered economy in Canada. So they're a close partner of CALSTART, a Drive to Zero pledge partner, and they have been instrumental to getting Drive to Zero launched in Canada. So today we have a collaboration agreement in place, and we're excited to count on Clean Energy Canada to convene influential dialogues, to inform policy leadership, and to conduct original research, really to accelerate the deployment of zero-emission vehicles in Canada. So Canada is definitely a priority for Drive to Zero, not only because of your environmental leadership, but also because of the need to create an integrated market for zero emissions and innovative commercial vehicles. So Joanna, thank you for being here today. And I know that Canada has made a strong commitment to zero emission buses. So could you give us more details on this commitment?
Thanks for having me today, Cristiano. Yes, so Canada has joined a small but growing group of countries, states, provinces, and cities by pledging to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Transportation accounts for about a quarter of our country's emissions. So electrifying buses and trucks are going to be a big part of meeting that 2050 target. As you mentioned, last year, Canada signed on to CALSTART's Global Drive to Zero pledge. And then the federal government built on this commitment by promising to get 5,000 zero-emission school and transit buses on the road in the next 5 years. Now, Clean Energy Canada has been hard at work engaging with cities, transit agencies, and other experts on some of the best policy and program ideas to help accelerate this transition and meet that 5,000 bus target and beyond.
That sounds great. And, that's very exciting, to hear about this commitment. And I know that you're actively engaged with bus fleets and governments to support this commitment. So could you tell me a little bit how that engagement is going and what your expectations are for Canada's ability to deliver on this commitment?
So the 5,000 bus commitment is certainly ambitious, but at least pre-COVID, transit agencies across the country were moving in the right direction. So we had a number of larger transit authorities in Vancouver, to Edmonton, to Toronto, to Montreal, ordering electric buses and making promises to stop purchasing diesel buses altogether by 2025 or earlier. Smaller cities and transit agencies were also on board with electrification and taking some of the first steps in electrifying their bus fleets, whether it was conducting feasibility studies or launching smaller pilot programs. Fleet managers know that electric buses tick all the boxes. They help to save them costs on fuel because electricity costs less to power up. Electric buses have fewer maintenance needs than a diesel-powered bus. We, of course, know electric buses produce no pollution, so they create healthier communities. And they're also visible demonstrations of climate action in motion. People love seeing electric buses zooming through their neighborhoods. And then finally, in places like Canada, electric buses provide an economic benefit because we are home to some leading electric bus and truck makers. So this is all to say that many agencies were on board making headway towards electrification, and they just needed some financial and technical support to overcome some of those upfront cost barriers and accelerate the transition. So that's where that federal government commitment came in. And that's where we were until the COVID pandemic hit.
Yeah, and then, it's really important that you brought up COVID. Obviously we're all very concerned but also interested in, how COVID is changing the commercial vehicle space. So how do you think COVID will really impact Canada's ability to deploy the zero-emission buses?
The world has definitely changed, and certainly in the public transportation space, transit agencies are seeing ridership levels drop, more than 80% in some areas. And many Canadian transit agencies rely fairly heavily on the fare box as a main source of revenue. And so a number of these are struggling to stay afloat financially. We have certainly had many questions and many people wondering, what is the future of public transit in a post-COVID world, and how does electrification fit into that? So the good news is that we have heard from the federal government that they remain committed to electrifying bus fleets in Canada. And then Clean Energy Canada believes that investments in public transportation that support high quality electrified transit must be an essential component in any economic recovery package that we see coming out of the government. Maybe just briefly, I'll say we sort of see this playing out in three phases. So the first will be obviously emergency funding and immediate relief to transit agencies to make sure that we're sustaining service, keeping these operations running, keeping people safe. Transit is playing such a crucial role right now, getting essential healthcare and emergency workers to their jobs. So that sort of support is the first priority. Once the worst of COVID is over, and even now we're starting to see some parts of our economy reopen slowly, we're still expecting to see relatively low ridership and demand for public transit. People are afraid to share those enclosed spaces with each other. They're all set up working from home. Many don't have anywhere to go because their workplaces are still closed. So the next step is really going to be focusing on rebuilding confidence in public transportation. And we think the best way to do this is to invest in high quality transportation systems. In the near term, that will focus on making sure our buses are safe and clean. Maybe it's running more buses with fewer people. Maybe it's plexiglass barriers to keep the driver safe, that sort of thing. In the medium term, we may be seeing more investments in bus rapid transit lanes or dedicated bus lanes, let's say, to increase speed and service quality. And then finally, economic stimulus and recovery. It presents just a real opportunity to scale up our electrification efforts in our public bus fleets and build the transit systems of the future. We hear from transit agencies that their procurement cycles run 12 to 18 years. So that means that the investments we're making today are going to last for decades. And we can't lock in an old technology. So it just, this is all to say modernizing and electrifying our bus fleets, it will help to maintain these high levels of confidence in our transit systems. And this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to reshape those transit systems for the future.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Thank you so much for your insights. And it's really important to see that despite all of the uncertainty that we have, and the decrease in ridership that we have, that Canada is still committed to a long-term support to public transit, not just from a technology standpoint, but just from a public service standpoint as well. So it's very, very hopeful and inspiring. So, finally, I just wanted to ask you, how do you see, action in the clean commercial vehicle space in the US supporting the Canadian objectives, to clean your commercial fleets?
So I see action in the US impacting Canada in at least 3 ways. The first is it offers lessons learned and ideas for policies and program solutions that help to accelerate the deployment of electric buses and trucks. When we are crafting recommendations for our federal and provincial governments, we're looking to the US's low or no emission bus program and what it covers. It covers skills training and infrastructure in addition to the purchase of electric buses itself. That's a great model for us. We also look to, or have been looking at California and New York's voucher program for electric buses and trucks. And, we're asking how are those programs designed? Could they work for the Canadian context? So certainly, U.S. leadership impacts us in that way. The second way that action taken in the U.S. kind of impacts us is that it expands the market for some Canadian clean technologies. So I mentioned that we have some leading electric bus and truck manufacturers here. There's Lion Electric, which is based in Quebec, and it produces electric school buses and delivery trucks. There's New Flyer, which is a Winnipeg-based company, one of the largest bus manufacturers in North America, and it now has also started to produce electric buses. These companies rely on markets like California, where they are selling a large portion of their lower carbon products.
Yeah.
And then finally, I just want to say action in the US can encourage some healthy competition, right? When we see cities like LA or Chicago taking big steps on electric buses, it can inspire our cities to do the same. It shows us what's possible and could incite a little bit of fire, competitive fire. And so, yeah, those are 3 of the ways that action on clean transportation in the US impacts Canada.
Yeah, no, that's very great. It's good to see this interplay between having an integrated market, but also leveraging, healthy competition, like in the marketplace. So very well said. So Joanna, it was lovely to see you, and like to thank you for your time today, and especially for your continuous support and engagement with Right to Zero. Thank you.
It's great to chat with you too, Cristiano.